What's up, everyone? Welcome to Mongols. I'm Mike Sparks. We've got a couple of things going on in this week. First, I chatted with Riverhounds President Jeff Garner about expanding Highmark Stadium, whether that could lead to an increase in roster funds, and his hopes for the new Women's Sports Advisory Committee. After that, I'm going to be joined by Steve Mattias and Drew, aka Mondo, to break down all the returning Hounds players that have been announced, the growing Riveters roster, Steel City FC joining USL League 2 and USLW, and more. There is so much to get to. As always, you can find us on all the social platforms, including YouTube, TikTok, Blue Sky, Instagram, Twitter, etc. And we always appreciate a like and subscribe wherever you're getting this. You can email thoughts and questions to mongols3@gmail.com. And with that, on with the show. Jeff Garner, welcome back to the show.
I appreciate it. It's great to be back. It's been a while.
It has been a while.
I don't know if I should take it personally, but
I'm
listening to everybody else get to come on, Dan and everybody else, and so I'm glad to be back.
Listen, I know that you're a busy man, so we try to be respectful of your time. That said, how was your Thanksgiving, man?
It was good. Thanks for asking. We spent time with family, traveled back to my hometown just south of York, in between York and Baltimore. Got to spend a day and a half, which is a lot. My daughter plays high school basketball, and so there's practices and games, and so it was quick. Last year we had to drive down Thursday, back Thursday. This year we got to stay till Friday and back. But otherwise, we had a good Thanksgiving. It was good to have everybody together. How about you?
Good. Yeah, same. Just sort of got together. A family came in from out of town and got to spend a day just hanging out. So, yeah. No, it was good.
Great,
it was good.
Great.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time online shopping on Thursday and Friday, that's for sure. On Saturday and Sunday, my front porch looked like a little bit of a joke. So I might have a small online shopping addiction.
Hey, I keep getting all the notices from all the sales that the Hounds are putting out there. So I may or may not have been spending some money there too.
Yeah. It's working.
It's working. Yeah. First off, congrats on a season of sellouts, essentially. It seems like regardless of what may have been happening on the field, you've been able to consistently put butts in seats. What's been the difference maker for you?
Well, I mean, it's always easier to get people excited and draw people in when we're winning games, right? So that's the goal. That's where we want to start. But there's a lot of factors that go into what happens on the field. And some of those factors we control and some of them we don't. So we have to build a business, the business part. We have to build that around something that isn't necessarily tied directly to the results on the field, right? So I used to get into trouble at Penn State with James Franklin because I would say, Coach, I have to expect you to lose every game and still sell 100,000 seats. Oh, we would never lose games. I know, but my job is to sell tickets and put people in the stadium. Your job is to go win games. So it's the same kind of mentality. I've got to assume the worst and build an experience that draws people in regardless. And so I think fans saw another year of creative promotions, creative experiences. We added some new stuff. We brought some stuff that worked really well in 23. We brought that back in 24. We added some 25th anniversary things. And some of those things will build into tradition and they will carry over to next year. Others, maybe they didn't work so well. So we'll throw those out and we'll bring some new things in. And hopefully we get to a point where all 17 games are, grand slams, that it's built over the couple years of things that we know work and we know fans like. And when we're winning, it just makes the atmosphere that much louder and that much better. And if we're struggling, it actually, and I think we saw this year in July, we struggled in May and June, but we came back to those 4 home games in July. And I think our fans, maybe as much as anything else, helped turn the whole season around. And that was because they stuck with us. They were there to have a good time. But when, the team needed them, they were there and they were loud and it paid off. So I think we're building something sustainable.
I'm a bit of a stats geek, and thinking about sort of the growth and all of the sellouts and things like that, a number that sort of came to mind, and I don't expect you to have the stat in front of you, but I'm just curious, do you guys track stats relating to how many people who attend games are repeat attenders versus new fans that are coming for the first time?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't have it in front of me, but sort of anecdotally, I can probably talk through some of it. So obviously with the growth we've had in the last 2 years, there's a lot of new fans, right? I think part of the struggle sometimes is of those new fans, some are soccer fans, right? And because we've built an entertainment experience, some of them are entertainment fans, right? And those are the fans that walk out. I don't know if they know the score at the end of the game, right? They're here to have a good time. They're here to cheer and have fun, but they're not necessarily tied into exactly what happens on the field. And so we've got a lot of new fans. It's a combination, right? So, and then of course we've built on our existing fans, getting fans to come back to 4 or 5 games instead of 1 or 2 games. But we're going to have to keep attracting new fans to keep building. Obviously, everybody, is aware of our plans to expand the stadium, and I'm sure that's something we'll talk about. We're going to have to keep bringing new people in, and so we're starting to build that. One of the things I think maybe we're working towards this year is more segmented marketing and a more segmented approach, because we do realize you have these different pockets of fans that experience games differently, whether that's in the stadium or at home and it's away game, or even a home game that they're watching on TV. There's the diehard soccer fans. They're there because they appreciate the game itself. There's the dollar beer, right? The 20-somethings that are just coming for a cheap night out and to have a few beers and hang out. And it's very social. There's the families, particularly young families, and that are coming that are a little bit more kid-oriented. So there's a couple different pockets of fans like that, and we have to try to find ways that appeal to all of those different fans. We'll see a certain giveaway or a certain entertainer we'll have that will draw more kids. It affects how concessions are sold. It affects which tickets are bought. And so we're constantly trying to manage all of those things while simultaneously trying to identify new groups and new audiences and just bringing more people in. That's certainly a goal. When you look at the organization as a whole, the Riverhounds are a great gateway. But that gateway then leads to the Riveters. It leads to the academy. It leads to our, venues and rentals and other things that we're doing with different events. And so it's all an opportunity to just build a larger ecosystem with new fans.
It's so cool how you mentioned how all of that is interconnected and based on the fans. Yeah, super, super cool. Like I could spend all day talking to you about that. But you did mention expansion. And I think the last time you were on the show, we talked a little bit about it, but we didn't know much. We just knew that it was potentially coming. It sounds like the ball is now rolling and there may be some funds. What can you tell us about the expansion project moving forward?
Probably not as much as you would like. There has been some funds allocated. We have a better idea of what some future funding could look like. The timeline over the course of, say, the next 5 years is still exactly when some of those things are going to land are still a little unknown. But we are still looking at that kind of 5-year horizon to be done with the expansion. This first allocation, basically where we are in the process, as we have gone through concepts with multiple architecture firms to try to identify a group that we wanted to work with, a group that shared the same passion and the same sort of ideals and the same fan experience thoughts that we had. We've been going through that process for a year. We are basically down to 2 finalists. We are in the process of sort of collecting a final proposal, not only on this first phase, but just looking ahead to what the other phases and what the master plan will look like. And so we will select a final architecture firm, identify them, and then get to work on sort of the real details of what's next for this upcoming season in 25, and then also a better idea, a more specific idea of what the next 5 years look like and how those phases will break up. At the end of the day, we're beholden to the funding and how that will come out. And so we may have to shift and move, but we are starting to put that plan. It's becoming more concrete. It's kind of going from pencil to pen at this point. And so I think the next thing people will see is probably a selection of an architect. And then from there, we'll really start to get into what the final concept is going to be. And we'll probably start to share that in pieces. And then hopefully we see something in the very near future as far as what 2025 is going to be, because we do have some project funds that are going to start in 25. And obviously with the season approaching, we got a short construction window. You're not going to see 10,000 seats added for next year, but I do think you're going to see some changes.
Okay.
It won't be a lot of capacity. It won't be a lot of seating. It will be more amenity based.
Okay. That was going to be my question, is considering where we are in the cycle, considering that it's December, is it your expectation that there will be changes before fans re-enter the stadium in 2025? Or do you think this is something that we're probably going to see progressing throughout the season and, we might see more at the end of 2025?
Right. There's two parts to that. There's the state funding part, which is, I guess, more of the expansion. And then there's also just what our typical capital improvements would be. So, for instance, I think we're pretty much finalized on replacing the field in January. So the field will be offline. That's not part of the expansion. That's just us, replacing the field. And so there'll be some changes like that are happening that will be in place for 2025. I don't think we're quite to the point where I can say 100% will things be done before 2025. It'll likely stretch into the beginning of the year, but we're certainly moving as quickly as we can to get those projects done. Obviously, we don't want to have a lot of construction happening during games and during the season, but we'll have to work through that as it goes forward. But I think fans will see changes, before the season and then as the season progresses.
Okay. One thing that we've discussed a lot on the show is the desire to grow the stadium without impacting the atmosphere. So you look around the league, there's a lot of empty stadiums, which definitely obviously impacts the experience. Considering how well attended the Hounds games are, it feels like that team is ready for expansion without risking the experience. But you have this new team in the Riveters that are going to be starting from scratch. So how are you focused on ensuring that there's a similar fan experience from the women as there are for the men, even as we go through all of this expansion?
Right. That's certainly something we consider as well. I think, as I mentioned on the expansion, you will see more seating capacity in the later stages. Mm-hmm. We're not going to jump and add 10,000 seats and then try to fill it. I think we will grow. So you'll see 2,500 seats, you'll see 1,500 seats, and then towards the end of the 4 or 5 years, I think that's where you'll get maybe a 6,000 or 8,000 seat jump. So it'll be much bigger then. If you look back, it's really been the last 2, maybe 2.5 years where we've had really sustained capacity type attendance. And so I don't think we take that for granted either, right? That we don't have 20 years of history saying we'll sell out every game. Right. And so we have to build towards that capacity. On the Riveters side, that's the experiment, right? Is to see what the market's appetite is. I can tell you at this point, season tickets are on sale. We've just released deposits on premium and groups, even though we don't have the schedule yet. And I can tell you that our season ticket number, now granted, it's a shorter schedule, it's less of an investment in time and money, that we are trending towards potentially having more Riveters season ticket holders than Riverhounds season ticket holders.
Wow.
And
That's
so,
great.
So far that response has been very positive. We're very encouraged by that. Group sales are a big part of how we fill stadiums, youth groups, community groups, corporate and businesses. And so that is starting to get underway. I expect that we're going to see a lot of growth there too. And back to your earlier question, it's a great opportunity for us to bring in new audience, new people. And I very much think, just as we're seeing some Riverhounds fans buy Riveters tickets, I absolutely think we'll see people that come to see the Riveters and say, wow, what a great stadium. I'm going to come to a Riverhounds game also. So it's going to be mutually beneficial. It's not just the Riverhounds supporting the Riveters. I think the Riveters will just as much support the Riverhounds and our growth there. We do take into consideration atmosphere is very important. We don't want empty seats. And so that's taken into consideration. At this point, I feel pretty confident that we're going to be looking at sold out Riveters games this year.
That's fantastic. It was just announced this week that the organization has helped establish the Women's Sports Authority Committee, which includes professionals from all over the area. Can you talk a bit about that committee and what you hope to achieve with it?
It is extremely exciting. It is sort of one of the things that up until this point, I'm probably most proud of. It is such a great group of people. They are like-minded in that they are passionate about women's sports, not just women's soccer, women's sports. They all have connections to Pittsburgh in some way. They're from Pittsburgh. They live in Pittsburgh now. They've played or coached. They're all connected, and they want to see Western Pennsylvania grow. They want to see opportunity for girls and women grow. They've been so wonderful to interact with and talk with. They're excited. They're passionate, and they're impressive. It's a really impressive when you look at the experience collectively that this group brings together. It's really amazing. We're going to learn a lot from them. They're going to be able to help guide some of these decisions on how we take things. And so I'm very grateful from that standpoint. It's also really cool to see and create opportunities for, like Tessa, for instance, for her to have an opportunity to interact with other women that are so accomplished and have so much experience. I think it's going to be super beneficial for her. And, I think it's going to be really rewarding for the members that are on our Riveters Advisory Committee. So it's awesome. I can't wait. We'll start meeting this month. I can't wait to get their feedback. I can't wait to hear their ideas. I can't wait to start putting those things into practice. I can't wait to get them out for the home opener in May. And it's just a really wonderful, awesome thing. I mean, as a father of a daughter who happens to be an athlete too, it's like these are the type of women that I want my daughter to grow up to be like. And I can go home and, feel very proud about trying to contribute to her experience in a positive way. So it's just a really great, fun, exciting thing.
I will say, as a fan of the organization, you often sort of expect certain announcements, and that was one that came through that I was not expecting at all, but literally like audibly went, oh, wow, because of just, like you said, the powerhouse of people that are involved with that. So yeah, it'll be very exciting to sort of see what comes from that group and the types of ideas. It's a very cool initiative. So kudos to you guys.
Yeah, we are very lucky to have that group.
Not sure if you can talk about this. This is something that I think fans have theorized and sort of bounced around. And I said, I'm just going to go straight to Jeff. And if you say we can't talk about it, that's fine. How much does success in the stands, tickets, concessions, merch, translate into funds that may be potentially available for the roster? We've theorized that certain players going different places, maybe we couldn't keep them. We don't know. But as the plan for expanding Highmark Stadium starts to come more and more into focus and becomes more and more a reality, should fans expect that means that there may be potentially more funds for players, or is that just not how the organization works?
No, sure it does. Yeah. I think as the organization grows, as revenue continues to grow, then, we look to reinvest. I think Tuffy's always done that. He's reinvested in the club. Important to understand that it's very challenging economically for most of the USL clubs, right? We're in a position where, because we've diversified and we have some of these other pieces that help to support the pro team, it puts us in a better position. Still not a great position quite yet. Quite frankly, the stadium's just too small. Another reason why we're expanding. But I think it's very, we very much look at it like as we grow and we're able to bring more revenue, and that's the whole organization, not even just the Riverhounds and selling tickets, but the whole organization. As that all grows, it allows us to create more resources to put back into the club, and that's the roster, that's the stadium. Some of the state funding that's available is not going to fund the entire expansion, right? So the growth in staffing and coaching on the academy side. And so, yes, I think as we grow, the other, I think, important thing is that due to the structure of the CBA and the players union and where the USL is growing, the roster expense continues to increase, even if we had the same roster from last year.
Right.
And so every year we expect that will continue to climb and continue to grow. And so we have to weigh that. So are we bringing in enough to outweigh the increasing, salary costs of players? That all those things go into it and weigh into it. I know Tuffy and Bob certainly are both, very committed to putting a winning team on the field. I know we have been very aggressive. It may not seem like it in some cases because we've lost players, but we have been aggressive with those players, and in some cases just weren't able to get something done. But ultimately, I think the results on the field speak for themselves, in that we've had 7 straight playoff appearances, and we all understand that the league's getting more competitive. We need to keep investing, and I think that's what you'll continue to see.
Yeah. We were talking how, basically there is no off season for you anymore. You guys have been hard at this since, October and before. Let's jump ahead 1 month to like January. By that point, what are sort of the top 3 things that you hope to basically have ironed out? And then what will be your focus, maybe moving forward from there?
Yeah, I mean, there's some basic things like the Riverhounds schedule, right? So we are always working towards getting the schedule out as quickly as possible. And I say we, that's really the USL. They want to get it out earlier. There's so much flux and bend in the USL that it's difficult to always do that. Brooklyn just, kind of got pushed back a year. That changes things. And it always flips the schedule when that's happening. And there'll be some other schedule competition structure related things that will be released when the schedules, that's a little teaser for you, that will be released when the schedule's released. And so that has slowed things down a little bit. But in the next month, we'll have the schedule out. Very shortly after that, we'll want to have our promotional schedule matched out and up with that too, so that we can put tickets on sale. People will understand sort of what's happening on what dates. The Riveters, certainly in the next month, we need to make a pretty quick jump on putting the roster together, but also getting ready for the first game and the inaugural season. There's a lot to get done. We're not rinse and repeating the basic things like we would with the Riverhounds. We've got to create processes and procedures and structure that obviously we can borrow from the Riverhounds because we've done it, but still there's new people involved. There's a lot to do there. Certainly the Riverhounds roster will continue to take shape. So you're talking a month from now, you're talking combine, we're not far out from training camp starting at that point, and we'll, need to have the team mostly together. And then furthering the expansion plan, getting the field, that project should be in January, doing some other things around the stadium. And so, yeah, it is not, there's no such thing as an off season. We'll start calling it the on season, I guess.
Yeah.
But those are the things that jump to mind for January. As you extend out a little bit, obviously the rosters will be set, but now you're focusing on game operations. You're focusing on whatever stage of the expansion we're in and what's happening there. And for the Riveters, you're just gearing up for what should be a really incredible, historic home opener in May.
Listen, 2025 feels like it's going to be a massive year for all of the reasons you just said. What are you personally most looking forward to?
Oh, wow. It's hard to narrow. It's like having kids and like you don't have a favorite kid. You have all these things that you're working on that you're passionate about, that our staff is passionate about, that ownership is passionate about, that we want to see happen. Certainly the Riveters, just the Riveters coming into existence, their inaugural season, their home opener, that's going to be a really, not to be cliche, but kind of magical thing. I'm really excited to see that happen. For the Riverhounds, I'm excited to see how all the work we're putting in the offseason translates to the 25 season. It gets harder and harder each year. Quite frankly, I felt like it was kind of easy in 23 because there were some things that just probably should have been being done that weren't, and we were doing those and they were received really well. All that stuff's there now, right? And so 24 was harder than 23. 25 is going to be even harder. We got to be more creative. We have to keep challenging ourselves. So sort of seeing where we end up on the promotional schedule and what the fan experience turns into and the things we add to the stadium, I'm really looking forward to see how all of that turns out. We've got some really cool plans and ideas that we're working on. And probably making a lot of progress on AHN Montour and the expansion there. We talked about the stadium, but we're adding another 7 mostly outdoor fields at AHN Montour. That work has the foundational work has started related to permits and things like that. So it's already going, but to actually start knocking trees down and leveling land and getting things going, I can't wait to see what we look like by July out at AHN Montour. So there's 3 things that I think are, I'm really looking forward to for this year.
Yeah. All great stuff, Jeff. As always, I appreciate the time. Looking forward to all of those great things that you and the front office have in store. Can't wait to talk to you again soon. Thanks, man.
Yeah. thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it. And thanks for all you guys do, being fans and talking about us and, keeping us alive in the on season.
All right. I am joined now by Steve and Drew. Gentlemen, welcome. Thoughts? Jeff just spilled a bunch of stuff, it feels like. Steve,
there's a ton in there, I think, that Jeff talked about. I really like what Jeff was talking about in terms of what things look like over time for the expansion plan, that things are moving forward at some point, and that there's some of the big pieces, like some of the funding already coming in. That's really exciting to me. I'd love to see a lot more seats this season. I'd love to see a massive infrastructure a change, but recognizing that takes time. But if some of those things are starting, that signals, I think, really well for the future. And also not to discount the field as well, and getting that really nice. I think it's going to be it's due. I don't know if you've looked at that field in a while, but it is well worn.
I wouldn't say it was the worst field in the USL, but we were pretty close.
I actually asked them after we got off air about, hey, would you consider selling, parts of the turf? And because they talked about potentially repurposing it, like rolling it up and moving it somewhere else. But first of all, the turf people were like, no, don't do that. But they said that if they were to sell it, if they were to sell it, something I hadn't considered, there's a whole sanitary issue to it. Like guys with sweat and blood and bled and all over that. And so if they're going to sell it, you have to clean it. I mentioned how, I still have Christmas tree ornaments that are part of the old Civic Arena that they took from it. So maybe the idea was floated. We'll see if anything comes of that. Drew, what were your thoughts?
I mean, I'm very interested in the new turf. I'm sure it's just going to be turf, but that glimmer of the possibility of real grass is great.
It's not going to happen, dude.
It's not going to happen.
I know. But I can dream.
Yes, I love the dream.
There was two things that stood out to me that I'm actually three things. One of them being the field replacement. So two other things that stood out that really excited me. One was this year we're going to see a lot of infrastructure improvements. So hopefully we're consistently selling out. I know we had sellouts for big games, especially during the summer where the Pirates are the Pirates and, and we brag about the Hounds being the best team in Pittsburgh. And we were still able to brag about the Hounds being the best team in Pittsburgh because the Pirates were doing the typical Pirates thing. And, we just have the summer is when nothing else really happens. Right. So we were getting people in. And then they were doing a lot of those. One of the ticket promotions that I noticed a lot of was the $10 college tickets. So I imagine we're going to see a lot of that. Maybe it's a consistent promotion throughout the year next year, because Jeff did say some things worked, some things didn't. And it seemed like that was one that kept cropping back up. But I think just on that regard, I think one of the things that hurt them the most was how late in the week they would do the $10 tickets. I know as a college student, I had my weekend planned before Thursday, Friday of the weekend, right? So hopefully that's we hear 2 weeks in advance, hey, these tickets are going or something like that. So I'm excited for that, just because that means when they do start doing this capacity increases in the 3 to 5 year window, the capacity, we will still theoretically be selling out that increased capacity. I really like the idea of the Riveters having more season ticket holders than the Hounds. I actually really like that idea. And I think that is a big, big statement just with Pittsburgh sports in general. And maybe the PWSL should take a listen to this podcast as hey, maybe you should have thought about Pittsburgh as one of your teams, because I think Pittsburgh is one of the biggest markets for women's sports that just has yet to be tapped.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of desire. There's so much desire.
Yeah.
So those were the two big things that I'm very pumped about, I think.
Yeah. I love talking to Jeff. There were a number of questions that I had on there that I I sent them to him in advance, and I was like, he's not going to answer these. And then he was like, yeah, let's talk about it. And I was like, cool. So like, just to be like, yeah, if we do sell more tickets, yeah, that probably means more money for rosters. Absolutely. Let's do it. That was encouraging. The fact that he, sort of kind of dropped that there's maybe some kind of tourney or something that's going to be happening during the season. He just kind of said it, and I just kind of
hear rumblings. We've heard rumblings of the intra USL tourney for a while now.
Have we heard real rumblings, or have we heard fans float the idea?
I think we've heard the typical USL rumblings.
Yeah, and so it's one of those things where it's like fans talk about it. Somebody says, "Oh yeah, that's a good idea," and my sources say that might get talked about, right? But never do we hear anything from the league. But I like that for me is something that I hope it really is, because I think that is just fantastic for the structure of the USL to have an inter league tournament throughout the season and give some of those right. It's like what we've always talked about as fans for a long time with the Open Cup. Let some of those small teams get exposure. Yeah, let's travel to a USL2 team. Maybe it's just down the street, right? Like there's some options potentially. But maybe it's Cleveland. Maybe it's I don't know. It's probably going to be one in Erie at some point, right? Like whatever it is.
Yeah, Buffalo.
Maybe
we'll get to go back to Rochester
for a couple of hours to go see the Hounds play in a cup against another team somewhere within a smaller radius. That would be a ton of fun. So I'm really hoping that that's what they're alluding to.
Yeah. I mean, especially with the constant question of the US Open Cup, just its status, where it's going to be, and kind of I think, if we're talking soccer politics, like the MLS's continual undermining of the value of the USL or the US Open Cup. So it would be nice to have something that I think is a little bit more open.
Yeah.
I mean, if that is what it is, I get real interested in then having some conversations about what does that do for how the Hounds build a roster if you've got potentially another tournament throughout the season. So let's wait and see. And then, hey, maybe that's a conversation we're having at some point.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we get to see those academy sightings actually get real minutes on the field.
Yeah. It sounded like he alluded to basically before the end of this month, we should know something about the schedule and we should know something about whatever this thing is. So, we really only have a few weeks left of December. So, yeah, definitely exciting stuff.
Although it could be peak USL to have time carved out for a tournament, release the schedule, and there's just gaps, but they don't say any reason why there are gaps for 2 months.
Yeah. Or they'll just say,
we thought you knew. We have a tournament.
Right. Yeah.
We're doing the draw today. Didn't you know?
Yeah. Someday those things won't happen. Not
Love
today.
The USL.
Guys, any other thoughts on the interview with Jeff before we move on to sort of all the other news that we've got going on here?
I have a pessimistic thing, and I almost didn't want to speak it into existence.
Okay.
But it sounds like one of the concerning things about our team and our roster is that we don't have enough seats at Highmark Stadium to be able to fund getting our most talented players back. And that feels like we're looking at almost 5 years before we're going to see full team retention.
So I disagree. Only because the cost of tickets has gone up and the stadium in the past 2 years is more full for the lowest attended games than we're used to seeing at some of the highest attended games in the seasons before that. Right. So I think, is there some lag? But I think the Hounds are in a much better position financially than they have ever been in, at least from a revenue feeding back in. It's also not a one-to-one, right? Revenue. I mean, if you're hosting 6,000 fans instead of 3,000 fans, you've got to pay a lot more people to ensure that goes well, right? And so you do that over and over and over. But I think that, I would disagree a little bit in the sense that I think that means we're not getting where we want to be. the more concerning thing to your concern, it's not we don't have the money based on what we're bringing in. It's that other teams are throwing around absurd amounts of money that are not
right.
coming
I think
from
that's
their
more of
revenue,
what I meant.
right?
Is
Um,
other teams
yeah.
Louisville have just
but
insane.
I really liked the one other thing I really liked from Jeff was his transparency in talking about how easy it was in his first season to just grab the low-hanging fruit and do those things, and it worked. And then having to be more creative this year and work with his team to find some things. And but also the aspect of we're going to see what worked and what didn't work. And if it didn't work, we're not going to keep trying it, right? Like that adaptability, I think, is really good. And so that gives me a lot of hope that they are really thinking through how to improve, not just from 23 to 24, 24 to 25, but and it sounds like, I think from what Jeff's saying, putting in a structure that allows them to continue to make those decisions every year of what worked and what didn't. And I really like that aspect of thinking about it.
It was awesome. I was talking to him a little bit off air, and he was saying, he loved being in Orange County. He'd go down to the beach. They won a championship there. But he said part of the reason why he's here is because there are so many opportunities, not just with the first team, but then you have the Riveters, and then you have the academy, and just like he could do so much stuff. And he's genuinely excited about doing that stuff. And I think you can see his fingerprints all over things that have happened in the past 2 years that he's been here. And for him to be thinking, Steve, to your point, it's not just 2025, it's 2026, it's 2027 is only going to be beneficial for the fans, for the team, for the organizations and everything. So really, really good stuff.
And built into that, something that I think we're not specifically saying, but you're talking about how he's excited about what he gets to do and is excited after 2 years.
Right.
And I just want to ask, when was the last time we had a person in his position that lasted more than 2 years?
That's
right.
True.
That's really exciting for me as well, that Jeff's been here for 2 years, and for the foreseeable future, I think we've got Jeff, and that's great.
Yeah.
I mean, his excitement is contagious.
Yeah.
Like I can't tell you how many times I had to listen to your interview to even pick up that slight negative feel. I've listened to it more than 5 times, guys.
You've listened to it twice as much as Mike and I combined.
Yeah, exactly.
I went a little overboard.
Well, once again, massive thanks to Jeff. We are going to continue trying to do interviews, hopefully each week here throughout the off season. My goal is to hopefully try to talk to Scott Gibson, director of the Academy and head coach of the Riveters this week. So if you do have questions for him, please send them over. You can either send them over social media or mongols3@gmail.com. We will try to get those in. But obviously so much going on with that team, as Jeff alluded to. We're going to talk about it here in just a minute as well. Would love to pick his brain on sort of where he's at with that. They literally just had open tryouts this past week, so they'll have a better sense of who else might be coming in. But before we get to that, guys, the other big news that has happened over the past week-ish, we were off last week, is the fact that the Hounds announced their initial roster signings. And so these are primarily guys whose options had been picked up. So these aren't new contracts per se. And these aren't the guys whose contracts have expired but have a chance of coming back on a new contract. These are primarily guys that either were still on contract and were coming back regardless, or they had an option. We chose to pick them up. And so for those who haven't seen it, the list is we basically have 10 players that we kept. So last year we kept 11, and there was a lot of buzz around it. It was the most we'd ever kept. This year we kept 10, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this. So we kept 2 goalkeepers. Last year we kept none. We kept goalkeeper of the year Eric Dick, which we mentioned it'd be great to see him come back. And we kept Jacob Randolph, which is very interesting. I felt that when Jacob had time, looked good, especially for a rookie. We'll see what can sort of come of that. Defenders, we have Sean Suber and Luke Biasi coming back. And then midfielders is basically everybody. We got Danny Griffin, Kenny Forbes, Robbie Mertz, Jackson Walty, Bradley Sample, and Aiden O'Toole, and then no forwards. So I threw all those names at you. Steve, initial reactions to sort of who's coming back.
The people that we know are coming back, I'm really happy with. Like, there's nobody that I'm like, oh, why did we keep that player? I mean, I think the Aiden O'Toole is probably the lowest on the list of needed to bring back from those players, only because everybody else played a much more important role in the season than he did. And so I just don't have enough data on how good he can really be because I haven't seen him enough. The Eric Dick and Jake Randolph options is really, really intriguing to me. And we had a pretty robust conversation on our podcast Slack a couple weeks ago when this first came out. And Justin and I were kind of going back and forth about, has Bob ever kept a backup keeper? And I contend that no, that Kyle Morton was not a backup keeper, despite the fact that Dan Lynn played a heck of a lot more than him in Bob's first season, because Kyle came with Bob from Rochester and then got injured. And so I think he was expected to be the number one, but it was the injury. He wasn't a backup or projected to be a backup. So, but that's the only time we've seen a guy that has not been the main keeper in a season come back. And so this is really interesting to me, and it makes me excited but nervous in some ways, because I am asking myself the question, is this Bob waiting for a contract offer for Eric Dick? And he wants to ensure he still has a keeper under contract if somebody comes knocking and willing to pay for Eric. Now, if that's the case, I am thrilled about that, because that means that Bob is learning. And Bob is saying, I've got this player under control. I'm going to exercise that control. And if somebody wants this player, they've got to pay me for it, which is not something we've really seen Bob do in the past. So, come on, come pay a lot of money for Eric Dick. Let us go spend that money elsewhere. We'll be fine at goalkeeper. Not a knock on Eric at all. But at the same time, like, I'd love to see that happen for the Hounds.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say, we know two things about the goalkeeper situation. The first is, I think for the first time ever, Bob spent an international slot on a goalkeeper in 2024, right? In Gabby Parada. And the other thing we know is Jacob is a big boy. And Bob said that. So the reason I say that is because Bob has said that several times about Jacob. So and that's one of the players who at the Meet the Team in 24 at the beginning of the season, he was very excited about, like very, very, very excited about, to the point where I think some of us there were kind of questioning, why did you bring in a third keeper if you're that excited about this guy, right? So I think this move kind of made sense. Like, I think it made sense to keep both. I mean, also, I just love Eric Dick. I think, I wax poetic with my data. The defenders make a lot of sense. Like that, and then having the whole midfield back. I think the midfield was the strongest part of our team for most of the year. So it makes sense to bring the entire midfield back and run it back, basically. I will add in, I think 2 to 3 of those midfielders are very good at being forwards, in addition to being midfielders, or go forward very well. So, I could see that. I could see a false 9 situation here with this team. And that's what starts to worry me, is I'm seeing Bob play into his 3-5-1. I'm worried he's trying to find that target striker. I'm really worried that we didn't learn any lessons from this year, and we're going back to, that kind of a build versus the 3-4-3 that was just electric towards the end of the season.
Sure. So, with the exception of if it is Danny Griffin playing as far up as he can, I'm thrilled.
Oh, yeah. No, that's what I mean. I see a false 9 with Danny Griffin leading it. Like, I
don't think Bob sees that.
Because you could very easily put Walty, Mertz, and Griffin as your front 3. Or sorry, not Walty. Sample, Mertz, and Griffin as your front 3. And
Bob's never going to do
Maybe.
that. We're going to get some strikers, but I actually don't feel like any of these guys are strong enough in terms of what we've been lacking, right? Like none of these guys all are great midfielders in their own rights, but we are missing what has made, I think, a number of Hounds teams so great in what Kenny Forbes was able to do in terms of passing and breaking open defenses in a way that since he got to a point where he couldn't play 90 minutes every game, we've been missing. And so I think that I love that we've got all these midfielders, but I want to see Bob go out and find someone that has that creativity to be able to unlock things that these guys don't have that skill set. And that's okay. It's not a negative on them.
I mean, look, you just mentioned Kenny. Do you think he's going to play next year, or do you think
he'll see some
pick
minutes
up his option so he can retire as a Hound?
No, I think he'll see some minutes. Do I think he finishes the season? I'm not sure about that.
I think he finishes the season. I just think we're going to have an announcement in the next month or so, and it's going to be this is the world tour for Kenny Forbes.
I don't know.
Or towards the second half of the season. I mean, it could even be a July announcement, and it's like
I can see Kenny playing the whole season and playing 400 minutes all season, or I could see him playing 400 minutes in the first half of the season and then retiring. And I got no idea.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I'm excited that we brought back sort of the midfield crew that we did. I went back and looked. Like I said, last year we kept 11 players. Of those 11, maybe 5 you could consider them to be starters when we brought them back. Of these 10 that we brought back, I think you could say confidently that like 8 of them could be considered legit starters with this team or spent time starting this past season. So that concern that we had last year where, we brought back a lot of guys, but a lot of them were like bit players and, they were starting on the bench, or that's not the case here. Now, how we get all of these midfielders on the field, that's going to be something that Bob's going to have to figure out. And we are going to have to figure out what we're doing on defense and forward. And we've struggled in the past to figure out the forward thing short of, I don't want to say getting lucky with, Dequa, but it does feel like that was sort of a diamond in the rough kind of situation. And so can we figure that out? Because that was obviously the biggest issue that we had this past year. And Kizza is not going to be back. Kizza has signed with Indy. So we know that that's the one that sort of stings. Whenever you see a player leave and go to an Eastern Conference rival, it's just like, ugh. Like, if you want to let him go, but like try to get them out west. But that's the case where, again, Steve, to your point with Dick, if we don't control their contract, we don't control where they go, and then we're kind of stuck. So,
I mean, it also has me wondering, are we going to, because, I mean, this was not really hinted at, but kind of hinted at from Jeff, in that he was saying that we're going to hear some contract news in the next month. That feels early for the Hounds, right? Like real contract news for the Hounds, because normally that starts dropping around January, right?
There have been a few players. We talked about this a few weeks ago, I think. 2 players that have signed in December. Russell Cicerone and Joe Farrell.
Yeah. So that makes me wonder.
We have had other players that have re-signed in December.
Sure. Yeah. I'm just thinking like from the outside, like how much outside are we going to see? And that makes me wonder, with there being some very electric NCAA players who are now out of the tournament or getting towards the end of the tournament, maybe there's something already in the works in the forward department. Of course, I'm speaking really hopefully, but like I have no reason to believe this at all. But it does seem like former Pitt players do really well for the Hounds.
We will see.
So
we shall see. Obviously, there's a number of names that aren't on that list that we talked about. That guys that contributed that I think some of us may have liked to see back, and they still might come back. Pat Hogan has been spending a lot of time with Luke Biasi. If you follow them online, like they've been traveling and doing cool stuff together. So maybe Pat will be back. But, players like Langston Blackstock, Asumanu, Etsu, Rovira, like we don't know what the future holds for some of these guys. And it unfortunately may not be with the Hounds. And that could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. Sometimes you got to shake things up a little bit to find something new. So we will see. It sounds like they're having open tryouts here soon, and then they'll have sort of the callback combine right after that. And we get into January, and they're really filling out that roster and putting things together so that they're ready to start hitting the field come March. So, yeah.
Well, and I think for me, the biggest question is there are a number of players who are out of contract that have not signed elsewhere yet. And so the question becomes, right now, we've got 4 players on the roster that have more than 1 year of experience with the Hounds. And you all have heard me talk about the importance of that long-term consistency. And so the question becomes, how many of those other players do we see come back, signing a second deal like we've seen with Danny, Robbie, Kenny, Roby over the years? Yeah. Right. And I hope that we see a little bit more of that, because I do think that is one of the things that's so important in continuing to build stability at this level.
Yes. I mean, I've said it when I talk to fans from other teams like Louisville, like Tampa, and I'm like, what's the secret? And they're like, we have guys that have been here for 9 years. Like they just know how to play together. And I know, like I just said, sometimes you got to shake things up and try new things, but when you've kind of got that core that understand, like, this is Fort Highmark and like, this is how we do, and this is how we roll. And it just, it's very, very important.
I mean, you can shake up a play style, but still have players who are very good together, right? Because that's almost what you would rather do. Yeah. Instead of shaking up the whole team every year, it'd be nice to like, let's switch some tactics because, and then everybody's like, okay, yeah, I know how, this guy runs. I know how this guy runs. I know how like this guy likes the ball. We can make that style of play, like this different style of play work, like this different tactic work. Yep. So, and I feel like you can't really test things out like that. You can't really experiment unless you have guys who've been around for a while. Like that's what it definitely comes back to that.
Yeah. Guys, any other thoughts on sort of the guys that are returning or the guys who aren't returning before we talk Riveters a little bit?
I hope everybody has realized this by now, but that this is not anything other than the players that the team had control over. And so absence of other players should not be taken one way or the other. And just, I remember when this announcement was first made, the number of people that were texting me or comments I was seeing different places of like, so-and-so is not coming back. I'm like, we have no idea. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. This doesn't affect that at all. This is the team saying, this is who we have control of and who we are keeping control of, not who we are negotiating with.
Yeah.
Also, there are some situations where players are on, like, the option is still available, but the player wants to negotiate something, right? Like that's a possibility, correct? If the option,
I don't think Bob does that.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm not quite sure how the contracts work, so that's why I'm asking.
Yeah. I think if I asked Bob that question, he wouldn't tell me. So it's just,
Knowing Bob, I doubt it.
Yeah. So that's what's going on with the guys. As I mentioned, the Riveters, I can't remember if we talked about this at all. I think we talked about the fact that they added Tessa to the roster as sort of their first player. We all said, fantastic pick. She's playing with North Carolina. Now she's made the U.S. women's U20 team, like just really putting her stamp on everything related to soccer. So that's fantastic. They also added Piper Caulfield, who is a defender. She is a former RDA product as well. And Kennedy Neighbors, who is a midfielder, which interesting about Neighbors is that she is not a product of the RDA. She played against them in like tournaments and stuff. So this is clearly a case of where the organization isn't just saying we're only going to take people that we're uber familiar with because we've coached them. They're looking for the best talent to try to build a winning team. And obviously we want to see as many RDA products as we can, but I'm not opposed to bringing in some outside players that can be role models for a lot of these kids in the academy and help, propel the W team to great things. So
what my initial thought when I saw the news about Kennedy Neighbors is this laying the foundation for trying to identify players for the Super League, Women's Super League team that we hope that they will have, right? That they are saying, let's get these players early and bring in some of these players that we think we're interested in and see what they can do at this level. Because if we do take that top level women's option, then we've got a foundation already with some of these players and not just RDA grads.
Yeah. That's a great thought, because when this was first announced, and I think it was Jeff that I talked to, it was either Jeff or Dan Visser, it was heavily alluded to that W is not the goal here. Like it's a stepping stone to something bigger. Yeah. Interesting thought. Maybe that is something. Well, we'll see how much I get into it. But if I do talk to Coach Scott Gibson this week, maybe I'll ask him about that and just say how much you planning for now versus the future here, Scott.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Hopefully he's not listening now to know that we're what we're trying to get at.
He's gonna tell Grubba, like, no, I'm not talking to Mike. That's not going to happen.
I'll talk to Mike in June,
July. Right. Yeah. No, so obviously really interesting stuff. I mentioned they had open tryouts on Friday, so I'm sure that we're going to hear more news coming from the Riveters. They kick off in May, so a little bit later than the Hounds, but they are clearly laying the groundwork for making sure that they have a successful season as well. Any other thoughts on the Riveters, guys, before we sort of segue into Steel City FC?
No, I'm just excited to see things continue to grow.
Yeah, I can't wait to see more names.
Yeah.
Seeing their advisory board has been really exciting. Like the names that are there. Literally everything about the Riveters has just been adding more and more excitement around the team.
Yeah. Jeff and I talked about the advisory board. Klingenberg's on there. Our friend Caroline's on there. Like just the names on that list are insane. So it sounds like they start meeting as a group. I think Jeff said this month. And so to hear the kind of things that come out of that, it's going to be crazy. Yeah. So really, really cool stuff. The other big news, and it was funny because it dropped the same day that I talked to Jeff, and Grubba was like, please don't ask him about this. I was like, okay. Steel City FC, is a, they basically formed from a combination of what was the Pittsburgh Hotspurs, and I think it was Arsenal, two different youth development clubs that had, semi-pro teams that would go out and play. And, they previously had teams that competed in the Open Cup, things like that. They dropped the news that they are going to have a men's team playing in USL League 2 and a women's team playing in USLW in 2025. So we thought we were getting one women's team in Pittsburgh. We are actually going to get two. So both of the teams are going to play at Founders Field in Cheswick. And they announced that it's part of the Central Conference. So when I heard Central Conference, I was like, oh, that's cool. Maybe we'll know who the Hounds are going to play with. Not really. So the way that it's structured is you have conferences and then you have divisions. And so we can probably assume that the Riveters will likely play in the Central Conference as well. But there are three divisions there: Great Lakes, Valley, and Heartland. And we could potentially end up in any of those. It has not officially been announced yet. Drew, thoughts on, now we're going to have a USL Championship team, a USL League 2 team, two USLW teams. What are your thoughts on Steel City joining the fray?
Oh, I'm so pumped. This is possibly the best news for both teams, because now you have local competition. And this is just like growing up, I remember like everybody's like, oh no, my club is better than your club. Like, and this is like the club you're playing for. This is like your local, like we're building that rivalry.
Yeah.
And that's just going to spur people further. And I think this goes to show, like, I said it right before we got started, and I think I said it maybe at the top of the show, like, there is a huge appetite for women's sports, especially in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is probably one of the biggest untapped markets for women's sports. And PWHL, like, what are you doing, man? Like, you left us high and dry. Okay, we'll have 2 women's soccer teams. Like, let's go. I would love to see both of these teams make it, like, end up being like S or NWSL teams, you know, because that just speaks to the amount of talent. And there's unbelievable talent in this area.
Yeah.
Like, unbelievable talent.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, like, I know personally very talented youth players, and it seems like at this point that there's a decision that a lot of families have to make of, do we go RDA or do we go Steel City? Because Steel City has a whole youth program that's set up as well. So to your point, you're going to have kids and families growing up in these systems, and this is, I mean, this could end up being almost like a Premier League, you know, Everton, Liverpool, or like the London team, where you're going to have, you can have a Steel
London
City
derby,
where you have these derbies between these clubs that kids have literally grown up playing for, and then they go and support them, you know, at this professional level. It's going to be nuts. It's going to be nuts.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I think we have cause to be a little bit jealous of Steel City, because depending on the NISA situation, Flower City might actually be joining USL 1 or 2, which means Steel City might get a trip out to Rochester before the Hounds get another trip out there.
Yeah. I really like this. I think you both are talking around this a little bit, but for Steel City, the fact that they're putting themselves in a position where there's a lot more league stability, rather than the constant question marks and drama that we've seen with the leagues that both their men's and women's teams have been in the past. And so I hope for Steel City, this means stability in the long term for their top level semi-pro teams at this stage, and to see what they grow into with that, right? That it's not just a development team, but now there's a path to something beyond the academy structure that's similar to the RDA, but gives them the chance to play while they're in college at a semi-pro level, and having that stability here, I think is fantastic. I love it.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I think it also speaks to the ambition of the USL, which you know, that's hugely important as a non-Division 1 division. I mean, the USL basically has the entire pyramid underneath Division 1. Yeah. And like, this shows huge ambition, and I'm loving it.
Yeah.
Agreed. It does put us in a situation, and we talked about this a little bit, not good or bad, just a situation where we were totally planning going into 2025, basically doing full coverage for the Hounds and the Riveters. And now all of a sudden there are 2 other USL teams, and it's like, well, do we give them a lot of coverage as well? And I think that what we don't want to do is necessarily water down the product that we're trying to produce as it relates to the Hounds and the Riveters. And so I think we are going to always acknowledge what's going on with Steel City. We are going to be watching the games, we'll be watching the scores, but we probably won't spend nearly as much time talking about them on this show. It might become something where it's worth doing another show that's Steel City focused, and we, you know, talk about the men's and women's teams there. We will see how this all sort of plays out. But at least for right now, I think that our focus is going to be primarily on the Hounds and the Riveters, just because, as I've said, there are so many people that we want to talk to. There's so many conversations to be had just around that organization, that if we try to do too much, it's just, you're going to have people that only care about the Hounds or only care about Steel City that aren't going to want to listen to both. And then it's going to be a whole thing. So we will see if you as listeners or watchers of this program decide that you want more Steel City content, let us know, and maybe we'll readjust and we'll pivot and we'll try to make room for everybody. But at least for right now, this is no slight on Steel City. It's just, we think that based on the relationships that we have with the Hounds and the players and the Riveters and the way things are going, we're going to spend the majority of our time focused there. But like I said, if you disagree, let us know, and we can sort of readjust and consider. And like I said, maybe there'll be another show where we just do Steel City stuff. We'll see.
And if you're on Steel City, send an email to mongols3@gmail.com and open up an avenue of conversation. Like that's the best thing that could happen.
Listen, we've had heads of the program on the show before. I literally have a Pittsburgh Hotspurs jersey that I ordered that like my name is on. Like, so like, yes, we are fans of the organizations. It's just, there's only so many hours in the day. So, yeah. So guys, that's a lot of news. Anything else going on?
It's the on season, I guess.
It's the on season, as Jeff said. Yeah, it just doesn't stop. So, in terms of like our production schedule, like I said, I would like to talk to Scott this week, which means that we will have another show for you next week. Probably same sort of thing where we'll do the interview, we'll play the interview, we'll talk about it, and any other news that comes out. We're getting pretty close to doing some kind of a holiday show. I don't know what that will be, but we need to figure out those details. And then before you know it, we're going to get into January and we're going to be off to the races. So strap in. And like I said, this is a fun time of year, even though there's not really any Hounds or Riveters games going on. Yeah. So otherwise, thanks, everybody. We appreciate the listen. Let us know what you thought about this episode. You can leave a comment wherever it is that you're viewing this or listening to this, or as Drew just pointed out, you can email us at mongols3@gmail.com. Otherwise, thanks, everybody. We will be back with more Hounds content and Riveters content very, very soon.
This is the way.
See ya.